Hello, and welcome back to Book Banter. Californian born Kerry Chaput has always dreamed of being a writer, but it took years of doing the practical life things before her dreams were set into motion. At age 40, she began writing, squeezing her passion into the wee hours of the morning and every spare moment throughout the day. Her stories explore the journey of young women, found family, and first love, while uncovering the diversity of women throughout history. Her badass women from history posts on TikTok are reason enough to subscribe to that platform. Trust me, you have to go check that out. Now residing in Bend, Oregon with her family, Carrie can often be found hiking the amazing trails of the Pacific Northwest. Please help me welcome Carrie to Book Banter.
Hi, Tanya.
Hello. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you for joining us. I can see the sunshine filtering in just a little bit behind you, and I'm getting the same thing. So I'm like, oh, we're on the same weather system.
Yeah.
And time zone. What a treat.
I know. What a treat that is. So true.
So I have to tell you, Daughter of the King is the first novel of yours that I've read, and I will definitely be reading more. I was so hooked. It's really, really, let me show everybody the beautiful cover. Doesn't that make you want to read it?
Like the cover designer for this series is she's done an amazing job.
It's so beautiful. I was literally looking at the details of the buildings because it's like, that's where the history is, right? Mm-hmm. Buildings have memories. That's my theory.
They do. They have souls. They always say that.
Buildings have souls, right? Exactly. So can you tell us a little bit about the premise for the story for those that haven't read it yet?
Yeah, it's set in 17th century France and Canada, and it's based off of the true story of the young women that the king basically offered this incredible opportunity to help him populate the colony of Canada, or New France at the time. And what makes it so interesting is that these young women, a lot of them were orphans, most of them were very poor or had big families. They didn't have any future really in France. And the king said, I will offer you a brand new life. I will give you a dowry, a trousseau, all the makings for a farm. I'm going to pay your passage. I'm going to give you protection under the king. You can live with the nuns and take as much time as you want to find a husband. And we're going to let you choose the husbands. And that was the point that I was like, oh, I'm in on this story. Like, I got to read about these women.
So progressive. Really?
Yes. Totally.
To give women a voice and a choice.
Yes. I know. And you just don't think of that with 17th century monarchies. No. King Louis XIV is an interesting character. I'm sure we'll talk about him more today because he was quite progressive for his time, but he had some other, he was a king. So
he was quirky for sure.
He was quirky, yes.
That was definitely, you can just Google him and look at the Wikipedia picture and go, okay.
Well, outlandish, yes.
I think so. I do. Yeah, it was very interesting. I noticed in your author notes that you were introduced to the actual daughters of the king, by way of research into your husband's French-Canadian roots. So what was the first nugget that intrigued you and got you thinking that there was a story here?
I really only wanted to find out where in France my husband's family came from, just as like a little Christmas gift. Both of his parents are from Quebec. They're 100% French Canadian, spoke French, the whole thing. And I asked his mom, where in France did your family come from? And she said, I don't know. We've been in Quebec for 300 years. And I was like, ooh, fun project, historical fiction author. I'm like, bring it. So it just became like a fun little project. Now this was when I was living in Montana. Super long winters. I was a stay-at-home mom with my 2 little kids. They were napping all the time. Like, I needed a project. So I was like, perfect. So I started doing this ancestry search, and the records are just incredible. You could follow it back to like 1300s, no problem. I mean, it's wild.
Really?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
The French Canadian records, especially because everything was centered around the Catholic Church, the records are impeccable because they're all through the church. So I didn't even know about the Daughters of the King. My husband's family has never heard of them. And I thought, well, okay. As I'm researching along, I kept finding this symbol on Ancestry and the other sites, and it was a fleur-de-lis, and it was a special symbol next to these women's names. And I thought, well, what does that mean? And I kept finding them, and they were women that were born in France, in the mid 1600s-ish, and then got married in Quebec. and died in Quebec. All of these women. And so I thought, well, what is that? So I looked up, I clicked on the link about the fleur-de-lis, and it took me to this whole page on Ancestry about Daughters of the King. And I was like, what is that? So then you start researching, and I read, and I'm looking at it going, how do I not know this story? Because it turns
Yeah.
out that if you are French Canadian, you are almost guaranteed to be descended from at least one of these 800 women.
Which is just, it sends chills down my spine.
And I ended up finding about 32 or 33 that my husband's from.
Really?
Yeah, his whole family goes back to the settlement of Quebec. And so, yeah, and there's probably more that I couldn't find. I just sort of ran out of headspace, but I had these notes that I just was going page after page after page because I was finding all these really amazing stories. And I was like, okay, this is overwhelming. So that's how it kind of stuck in my head. I didn't think about writing a story about it when I first heard about it.
Oh, interesting. Well, it's fascinating too because as a Canadian, I'm always kind of a little dumbstruck by what I don't know, and because
Well,
our
I
school
think that
system
too.
does not.
I think that too.
Yes.
You had asked about the Native American
Yeah.
population, and that blew my mind as an American because I was like, we're not taught this. We're not taught
Yeah.
this part of our history. So it's just that's part of the reason we research, right? Is to
Absolutely. Voices from the past that need to be
yes.
heard. Yeah, I completely agree. Um, so I didn't know anything about the Huguenots. I've heard the term, but I didn't know what it meant. And I
Yeah.
guess I didn't really dig very far. I certainly didn't know about the direct link to populating Canada, which was literally their purpose as a daughter of the king, which is just that in itself is stunning to me. So, your novel, though, captures the brutality and the forced conversion of faith faced by Protestants in the late 1600s France so incredibly well. It is, at first, it's a bit hard
It is.
to read because it is sad, but you also have to know that in order to understand the truth of history, you have to read the hard parts too.
Exactly.
And so I savored it because I paced myself because I didn't want to breeze over that history. I think it's important to sort of understand where it came from. And I'm
Mhm.
not French Canadian, as my French skills would likely tell you. Uh,
Neither. Me either.
but I am Canadian. So it was fascinating. There was one thing that I was having a hard time wrapping my head around, and it's the logic of King Louis XIV.
Mhm.
Now, we already said he's a little quirky. So, but here's the thing. He sent these young Huguenot women who were Protestant and supposedly converted, at least said they had converted to Catholicism. He sent them to New France, which was Canada, eventually Canada, to
Mhm.
populate the colony. But what I'm trying to figure out is, was there anything in your research that you compiled that led you to understand how the king, who was basically executing Huguenots left, right, and center, also was sending the same women of the same faith to a new French colony?
Mhm.
And did he just plainly think, oh well, they've converted, so they're doing everything for the king and crown now?
The number of women that were Huguenots were very small out of the Daughters of the King. There weren't that
Oh,
many.
really?
The majority of them were
Oh,
Catholic from Catholic homes. There were very few accounts. It was actually hard for me to find there, and there are a few in my husband's line that I'm like, I'm pretty sure you were Huguenot, but the record's not going to say that. But one of the
oh,
women
of
that I
course.
found, right, one of the women that I
Yeah.
found in his line who was very interesting was from La Rochelle, and that was a Protestant stronghold. And I know one for sure. Her name was Marguerite. Did convert, and she actually had a little boy, and they allowed her to bring the little boy and she could choose the father of
Really?
her kid. Like, how crazy
Ooh,
is that? Yeah.
that's amazing.
So it's really to understand where the king was coming from. You have to understand his approach of wanting to be an absolute power, right?
Mhm.
He was the longest serving monarch in
Yeah.
like 75 years or something.
Yeah, I
And
read that. That was
he was
crazy.
poor, I mean, it's just like he and everyone else believed that he was positioned there by God, right?
Right.
So he needed absolute control. He was
Okay.
not overly trusting of his circle in Paris, and he needed to gain power and to sustain power, he needed the priests on his side. So he was like, what do you need? And the one thing they cared about was making sure the Huguenots don't exist. We need them to
Really?
convert to us. They need to follow the Catholic rules, because at this point now you've got the Catholic Church is now one with the government. And he is the head of the Catholic Church and the head of the monarchy and the head of everything that France owns, right? So they were trying to consolidate power, and they didn't try to kill just because they wanted to kill them. They were trying to intimidate them to convert so that they all became Catholic.
Okay.
And what's really wild is
Hmm.
in my research, again, I'm not an expert in this, but in my research, the Huguenots, so they were just French Protestants of that particular time.
That's all it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And part of the Protestant faith is that you don't have a choice in you being sort of a chosen one, that
Right.
this is who you are, and conversion is not even an option because
Right.
this is the will of God. And
Mhm.
so that's what Catholics couldn't wrap their brain around, that they didn't have a choice. And so they kept just intimidating them and harassing them and murdering them, trying to get them to be scared enough that they'll convert. But the Protestants are like, we don't even have that ability. That's not who we are.
Yeah.
So
It's
they
not
just such unnecessary violence. And
yes.
a lot of historians actually believe, because of the persecution of the Huguenots, it's one of the major factors that led to the revolution, because it decimated their country. Huguenots were
Ah.
powerful and artisans and merchants and
Mhm.
educated, and they were a huge, important part
Mhm.
of French history. And hundreds of thousands fled because they couldn't be free. So the
It's
Huguenots that came
okay.
to Canada were doing so either, yes, I'm Catholic now, or
Mhm.
they were hiding or whatever. They ended up settling in the English held colonies of America, because
Okay.
Protestantism was welcome. And so
Yes.
you see their connection really strong on the East Coast. Like there's a town in New York called New Rochelle, and that is from the founders
Yes.
of La Rochelle that came over. So
Okay.
not
Gotcha.
impact on the
Okay.
East Coast is quite big.
Oh, interesting. So they would kind of come over as like they would flee and like
Exactly.
find different
And they,
places. Okay.
depending on where they were in France, they would go to the closest thing. Geneva was
Yeah.
very common because that was the founding of that time of the Reformation. So
Okay.
Geneva, like pretty much all areas around France welcomed them.
They just
England, very Protestant.
interesting.
And so
Yeah.
they were actually sending flyers out to people to be like, come here, we want you. You're amazing
Yeah.
artisans. Like, yeah. And so it was just
Yeah.
this
It's like
really
essentially the blue
unnecessary.
collar
Mhm. And
community
also,
of a
they were
country.
well-educated, well-read, and that's why they were powerful,
Yes.
because they could spread
That's
their
right.
message through the written word. So,
Yep.
yeah, it was really unnecessary and sad, and I agree with you. Even writing some of those scenes were like, "Do we really wanna put this in?" But I even took the lesser of some of the stuff that I read, because I was like, "Oh, some of it's just too hard to."
It's hard.
Yeah.
But you can't I firmly believe you shouldn't erase history.
Yeah.
I think that it's
The good,
when we
bad, and
know
the
better, we do better,
ugly. Mhm.
right? So
Yeah,
let's hopefully we won't repeat this,
right.
right? Like it's interesting. We have a comment here from Facebook. It may take up all of our screen because I've never posted one this
Okay.
long before. So we'll see what happens here. Oh, no, it did. Good job. So they don't teach about Daughters of the King in school anymore here in Canada, as far as I know
Interesting.
now. Oh, interesting. So I'm 10 years younger and I never got that lesson, but I don't know if that's because I'm West Coast
West Coast, it could
versus
be.
East Coast.
I
Because
have heard that in Montreal and Quebec that they do still teach it, but it's because it's a great source of pride for French Canadians. So it is
sure,
an important part of their
heritage.
history. But people that have
Absolutely.
been taught that in school have told me that it's sort of minimal. It's there, as most history lessons are on women. Here's their
Right.
contribution, and let's move on.
Yeah, right? Yes, exactly. So I'm glad to that you said this, Jen, because I was like, I think you're probably right. She says she's grew up in Ontario,
Okay.
and she's going to ask her niece who's a teacher. Thank you. That
I
would be
love
great
that
to know.
illustration. Yeah,
Please let us know because
because
either
in the
I
US,
fell asleep in
not
that
here in
class
India.
or but there's a lot of things in Canadian history on the West Coast that we did not learn. I know a lot about the Hudson Bay Company. but
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
about where it stops.
Mhm.
So, and they really don't teach the difficult times between the indigenous population and the Hudson Bay Company either. So that's the
There's
other
a
thing.
great show on Nat Geo that does talk about that,
Oh, really?
Barkskins. I think they only
Okay.
did 1 or 2 seasons, but it was so good. They actually talk about the Fitawa in there and everything.
Oh,
They
okay.
talk about the relation. It's a really good show. I'm sad that it
Ooh.
didn't get renewed, because we really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I love the history. I get a little carried away with my
Yes,
history
as we
stuff.
all do, right.
It's like, gee, oh well. Everybody has a vice, right? At
We
least
do,
it's,
and there are worse things
healthy.
to be obsessed with, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So when it comes to research, I mean, I can only imagine the depths of research that you dug into this story. But you did tell us where it began with just that
Yeah.
ancestry. But how did it evolve? How did you pick out like one little nugget? How did you narrow it down, all that vastness to
A 1,000
something?
revisions, like, I can't even tell you, this was only the 2nd book that I ever wrote, and so that first draft was a complete hot mess. I mean, I didn't know what I was still learning how to write, learning how to research, learning how to work with a critique group, so that first
That's
draft
right.
was wildly different, and I got in a great critique group, and they helped me pick out what was necessary, what wasn't, and they really helped me. They taught me how to write, really, and a whole lot of online courses and everything. So the research became for me a little bit of control I could have in this process where I was so out of my realm, where it was like,
That's true.
I don't know how to be a great writer yet. So I'm going to just dive into this research. So I spent probably 2 years just reading every single.
Wow.
I read
Okay.
textbooks on King Louis the 14th, on Paris in the 17th century, or France, and so I learned a lot of the big picture stuff. That was really easy. What was really hard is the day-to-day detail. You probably find this too. Like,
Yes.
what did their
Mhm.
shoes look like? How did
Yes.
they make candles? Like,
Mhm.
would that word have been around at that time? Those little
Oh,
details.
etymology. Like, I swear it's always open on my browser.
Luckily, most words come from Latin and French, so it's like we're pretty good there.
Yes.
But yeah, it was a lot of work, and every revision I did, of course, there's new amounts of research. So I enjoyed it. But what's great is now that I'm writing the series, I didn't have to do that big picture stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And it was a little
Mhm.
easier to just go, this is the year, this is the place, show me what life was
Yes.
like. And so I found some really great, fun websites that are like the Versailles website is
Mhm.
fantastic. It brings you
Oh.
through the years of what Versailles looked like and
Oh,
what the influence of
fun.
the king was and what the day-to-day life was like. Because
Okay.
the third book, I'm sorry, is set in the time that he had moved to Versailles, which is the late 17th century. And then Party Like 1660 is like my favorite website because it brings all of this interesting detail about the 17th century and France, and they put it in a modern, almost like blog style for a modern reader.
Oh,
So
wow.
good and engaging. Just for fun, sometimes read through that.
That's
So
sweet.
Offbeat France, I think is what it is, has some great, interesting stories. So I've found my favorite little online resources because I
Yeah.
did tons of textbook research before, and that's not always so fun.
Absolutely. I totally understand what you're saying because you do need a big picture before
Yeah.
you can dive
Yes.
into the details.
Yep.
So we've got Jen's got another suggestion for us here for it's also a Canadian Heritage Minute seen on TV. I have seen those, but it didn't stick. It must just not have been one of those things that
Is
stuck
Canadian
with me.
Heritage Minute, is that like a public broadcasting type thing?
Yeah, it's like a
Okay.
little blip of a snapshot into history, which is always
Nice.
fun. It's
They
always
really are incredible women when you research it. It's hard because when people hear it, the first thing their brain goes to is mail order brides, and that was not it at all.
right.
These women created their future
Yeah,
and a future for their kids and for their ancestors, and they were strong, brave women to
yeah.
do that at the time.
Well, you know what's really cool about the story, the way you've written the story too, is that your protagonist is she's like this instigator of making sure that the girls actually do what's best for them.
Yes, I wanted that
And
was important to me. And when I was starting to get the strength to try to write this story, I knew instantly she was going to be Huguenot because I liked that internal battle of that
yeah,
you can live and be
yeah,
Catholic, or you can stay true to your faith and die. Like that's an impossible choice. Like that's so
yeah.
unfair. And I
So
love the repercussions of what her life would look like for making this hard choice.
I think it's a really great premise to start with. I mean, and you did well with it. So
Thank
it's,
you.
I mean, to be able to spot that in itself is really, really cool. So did you travel for your research? Like, did you go to Quebec City
Okay, this is one of
or
my great,
France?
disappointments is that I
Oh,
had a sister trip scheduled. My sister and I were gonna take our first trip away from the kids, away from families, and we were gonna go to Quebec, and we had hotels picked out, we had flights picked out, and then the pandemic
yeah.
hit, and I was like, "Oh,
Oh, right. There was that. There was a
there was
blip.
that." So, I will one day make it to Quebec, and my Instagram feed will be covered in pictures
Oh,
because
you will
it's
love
way
it.
high on my bucket list.
You will absolutely love it.
The
Um,
pictures are like, "Oh, it's just so beautiful," and
it is beautiful.
it still has a lot of that, like,
Yes,
17th century feel of
it
French
does.
buildings and everything. It's really amazing.
Yeah, cobbles on the streets and beautiful low beams and stone
Yeah,
structures. It's
I love it.
absolutely stunning. You know what my favorite feature of Montreal is?
Huh.
They have this. Um, it's like an outdoor video thing where
Mm.
you go to a certain spot. You look for these posts or these signs, and you use your phone and you do the little, the squiggly. What's it called? The where you scan.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Like the
yeah, like a QR code, that's
QR
it,
code, yes.
and that starts the movie that is projected onto a building running, and it's snippets of different history of
Oh,
all different things.
that's amazing.
So cool, it's my favorite thing, like, the one I remember is, like, Jackie Robinson, and it talking about the career and the life and everything like that, but then they detail, like, some women, and so it
Mhm.
is worth
That
finding,
is fantastic.
so good,
There
and the food
is
is really
I believe there is still a working farm that the Fidois used to live at in
really?
Montreal because they started in the Abbey in Quebec,
Mhm.
and the program got so big and so successful that they had to find lodging, so they turned this farmhouse in outside of Montreal into their new housing. So I think you can still go there and they have
Interesting.
recreations and stuff.
That would be fascinating to next time I go there, I will definitely
Me
look
too.
for that
It's I'm
because
gonna one of these days, my husband and I have talked about it, like, we're gonna take a trip out there, just him and me, and we're gonna see all these are
yeah.
this is his family, right? These are
Yeah,
where everyone was baptized and where everyone lived and died, and so it'll be really fun for us.
the churches are stunning, absolutely beautiful, so I think we spent about an hour and a half inside a church talking with a priest
So
because I just was he was telling me all the history and I'm like, "Okay, I can't it'd be rude to write at this time, wouldn't it?"
oh, I totally get that. That's the kind of stories I'm like,
I'm
"Well,
like,
there's
"Can
no
I just
taking notes, right?"
record you?"
I know, it's what we do, we're obsessed with history, we're history nerds.
It's so funny, but it's also in Quebec City, there is, you and I have to talk about this afterwards. There is the armory,
Oh,
the base there, and there's some really, really interesting history. Now, Quebec City is very different from the rest of Quebec
okay.
as well. So it's actually a bylaw in Quebec City that you have to everybody that's working there has to greet you first in French.
Oh, sure, yeah, I get
Right?
that.
And then if you don't respond in French, then they will transition to English. Whereas like Montreal, you go in and they look at you and they say, "Hello."
Yeah. You know what? I don't think that's a bad thing, like, they're hanging on to their
For
heritage.
heritage.
You know, I
Absolutely.
French in high school and I can hardly remember anything, but when we've been to France, the first thing you do is "Bonjour, ça va?" Like,
Yes.
you say
You
something,
pull out.
just say it with a
Yes.
horrible accent, say, "Hello, how are you?" And then you ask your
Absolutely.
question. Don't ever ask to speak
Yes.
English, just don't. Yeah.
Exactly. I think
Be respectful.
and that's exactly it. Be respectful. And I mean, we have two official languages in Canada. And if I can't keep up with French, that's no bearing on them. That's my problem. So
Well, and
you
it's
know?
their heritage and their past, and I love
Yes.
that they're hanging on to it.
I do too. I mean, I took French all the way through high school. My son's way better at French than I am, and he challenged the DELF and got his university credits for French without ever taking a
Oh,
university French
that's
class.
I'm so jealous of that. We just were not grew up in California. Like, you learn a little bit of Spanish, but it's really not you don't learn much.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
It's and languages are so much easier when you're younger.
I know, now that I'm in my 40s, I'm like, "There's no way I'm learning a new language
I have
now."
a hard enough time with
Bullshit.
English some days. Words are hard in general.
Exactly.
so so I have to ask this question because I didn't dig too far into the research because I wanted to know what your response was going to be. You refer to the king as the Sun King
Mhm.
throughout the story. Do you know why he was referred to as that?
He named himself the Sun King,
Oh golly.
as one does,
Okay.
and, it was a great many things, modest was not one of them. Um,
No.
and I think it was because it was the symbol of Apollo, and he saw himself as the sort of
Really?
the center of the universe, and the planets revolved around the sun.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Like I said, he believed he
Okay.
was a gift from God, and he
He
was
certainly did.
yeah. So, yeah, you could talk for days about him, and he was interesting
Okay.
because he didn't actually care about the Huguenots. He didn't
Yeah.
care how people practiced, he just wanted power.
Interesting.
So he was not in charge of a lot of these programs of harassment. He sort of
It
turned
was
a blind eye
right.
to the priests that were initiating this.
So was it the priest that authorized the dragoons to
No, it was one
no?
of the lower level leaders, um,
Oh,
below the king that was trying to gain favor. So I go into that in book 3, actually, they created the
okay.
Dragonades, which were
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
well, that was later, about 20 years later after the first book. It was
Okay.
it was not pretty, but, at one point, it became so out of hand that the king said, "You need to stop." So he did have his
Ah,
limits, and he learned, I think, as he got older, that it was not helping. You're not gaining more control. You're dealing
you're
with
losing.
unruly
Yeah.
people that are just,
Oh,
persecuting
yeah.
people. That's not you're not gonna get power
Absolutely. No. You're not winning favors.
doing
How not to influence friends.
that.
Yeah, I was very curious about that because I was like, I just there's this disconnect
Yeah.
with him, and that's why I
Yeah.
was so
And he
how
was very,
mm,
he promoted the arts in ways that other kings didn't. That's the progressive part of him. So he was
okay.
very, everything was aesthetics and music and, yeah, artistic
Ah,
expression was a big thing in his world.
okay. Interesting. Okay, I could see there being more about him. Yeah, for
There's a
sure.
whole
Like,
lot. Yeah.
there's a he's a whole mini series all on his own.
Yes.
I can see it now on Netflix. Um, so one of the parts of the book that I really really enjoyed. Let's see if I can get into the camera again. This whole backwards thing. Um, was the indigenous tribal members.
Mhm.
I you wrote it beautifully.
Thank
You
you.
and I mean, I'm not indigenous, obviously, so I can't speak for that community,
Right.
but as somebody from the outside looking in, I thought it was very beautifully written and very
Thank you.
respectful.
I I
Um,
I stressed about that, and I had a lot of people read it,
oh,
and, so I think that, we talked about Naira, is
yes,
probably
I
my
love
favorite
her.
character. I mean,
Oh,
Isabel's my favorite of
yes.
all time, but I loved writing Naira, and I will tell you, she plays an important part in the rest of the series.
Oh,
Um,
good.
yeah, and I think that the more that I researched the specific, Huron tribe, the more that I learned the difference in the way Western philosophy views women versus the
Mhm.
native views of women.
Yes.
That was so
Yes.
fascinating, and
Mhm.
so I loved the idea that Naira was this young fighter, and, coincidentally, Naira is actually the name of a campground back in, like, near my hometown in California,
Oh,
and then
really?
researching names of the Wyandotte
I
tribe.
love the name.
Each of these tribes have really incredible websites that you
Yes.
can go on to and learn directly from them, which I really love. And I found a list of common names of, so we call them Huron, they're Wyandotte.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I found a list of Wyandotte names
I
and I
don't
said,
know why we do that, but yeah.
oh, it was King Louis. They
Oh,
decided,
really?
yeah, that's why you're Iroquois.
Oh,
I'm like, how did I not realize that was a French name? They're
yeah.
Haudenosaunee. But
Mhm.
the king decided to just take their land and then rename them, right? So everything's these French words.
Mm.
Yeah, it's
JT.
important, and this is the important part of like it's hard to read what
Yes.
the past is, but it's so important because it's the truth. So as
Yeah.
soon as I saw the name Naira and I had that
I love
connection to my hometown, even though the native in my area is Shumash,
Right.
still I was like, how interesting is that? That's a little weird. But so she formed in my mind so easily. And really for me, I didn't have any real positive female role models growing up. And
Mhm.
so I think she was in my mind what I would have wanted as an 18, 19-year-old
Ah.
young girl. And I wanted another young girl to be the person that taught Isabel. I wanted that
Nice.
sisterhood kind of feel,
Yes.
which was happening. I mean, they were
Yeah.
definitely friends, the French and the Huron. They were
Yes.
allies against the Iroquois. So it
Yes.
was happening. There, I still needed there to be that very distinct limit because a lot of them did convert to Christianity, but some of them did not. And they were like, no, that this is my life. And I wanted Naira to do that. I wanted Naira to stay true to her roots and um, not become one of the Christian French
I
native.
I think that's a very respectful way to put it because it's so hard because I think that knowing their history, knowing those details, like even just the fact that they had a name they called themselves and we decided to name them something different,
Right.
it gives you a perspective from which to look at and
Yeah.
understand how deep seated that sort of
Whitewashing. You can say it.
yeah
Yeah,
yeah
I mean, really,
and
the world of
how it's
colonization
real.
is painful and on a lot
Yeah.
of levels, and, it's hard as a white author to,
Yes,
we can't really understand it, but I wanted to be respectful, but I love Naira. I think she's an amazing character.
she was my favorite.
She's sort of philosophical and a little bit
Yes.
magical, and
Oh, I absolutely. That's exactly what I loved about
because
it
the
too. It's
Native
like
Americans that I have known, the indigenous populations that
mhm,
I have known are very spiritual and they almost have a touch
yes,
of magic, the things that
they
they know,
do.
they say. And so I love that. I wanted to bring that in.
Yeah. I I think you did a fabulous job with that because
Thank you.
she's on for me, and she didn't have a huge role. She had an
Right.
important role in the story, but it wasn't huge. And I think that it was just so beautiful. And I was like, oh, I hope she has more of that
She does.
because.
She does.
So we already said that this is book one, and that book two. Uh, Now the series is actually called Defying the Crown.
Yeah.
And book 2 is Daughters of the Shadows,
Mhm.
and that's coming in March,
Mhm.
so, like,
Coming up.
a month or so.
Yeah.
Wow. So, can you tell us a little bit where that story goes? So that we
Yes.
can binge this one and then pre-order.
I should have brought it over. See this inversion.
Oh, I can see it, yes.
Right there. I should have brought it over. Sorry. So in book one, it's a survival story, right? Isabel
Mhm.
is just trying to live. She's trying to breathe. She's trying to just
Yeah.
survive any way she can. Book two, she now has survivor guilt. She has survived in Canada, um, and she's left her people to perish in France. And she's a heroine.
Mm.
She needs to be good and she needs to save people. And so book two is about her finding the strength to be a fighter and to save her people.
Wow, okay. So then does the story go back to France?
It does.
Oh, okay, interesting. Oh,
And she goes
fantastic.
back in a very different role now because her life has taken some turns in book one.
Yeah,
And she makes some very interesting choices and
yeah,
tests loyalties a lot. I had a lot
yes.
of fun writing book two.
Okay. Oh, I mean, oh, yay. There's something to look forward
There's a
to.
lot of twists. There's a lot of twists.
Because when the author is excited about the book, that usually means that it's really good because it's
And
There's
what's wild, this is the thing we
enthused.
talked earlier about writing series.
Mhm.
I can jump into Isabel's head like no other character. I think because I've spent years with her. I
Interesting.
really kind of put off doing book 2. I was just like, I don't know what was I put everything in my life into that first book for years.
Yes.
And my publisher offered me a contract for book 2. And so I
You don't turn that down.
I wrote down exactly. So I wrote down a blurb and a title, and I sent it over, and he sent me a contract, and I was like, I guess I'm doing this. But what was wild is when I sat down to do it, the
Yeah.
story just, I mean, I can't even tell you how quickly I was writing 4 and 5,000 words a day because I couldn't stop it. It was just coming out.
Ooh,
Yeah, it
I
was.
would like some of that mojo, please.
I don't have it right now, but every now and then those projects have that, and I think I
Mhm.
would subconsciously been thinking about it for at least a year. That
Yeah,
I kind of had ideas of what I wanted to do, and then and you let's be honest, you learn about being a writer every book
you
that you
do.
do, and you learn how to improve your skills. And so I had worked a lot on just becoming a better writer, and so I got to put everything on display in book 2. I'm really proud of it.
Oh, fantastic. That's a good thing. I
Yeah.
can't wait to read it. I'm really excited about. And there's gonna be a third one too then?
Yes, I am about halfway through the rough draft of book 3. That'll be
Wow.
out March of 2024.
Okay, so a year from okay.
Yeah.
That's a good
It's
that's a good
unfortunate that
goal.
I'm not also doing 5,000 words a day right now, but
Yeah,
we can't
I
all live like
understand.
that.
Isn't it funny how sometimes it just flows like the open tap, and other times you're
Yeah.
trying to squeeze blood from a stone?
It's wild, and it's so nonsensical why some
Yeah,
it's not like I have more knowledge about the time period in book
yeah.
2 versus 3. If anything, I've read more about the time period of the Dragonades. So I don't know what it is, but I think that for me, the story of Isabel fighting all of these people outside of her because she's fighting herself. I
Ah,
can go back to that story over and over again. It'll be a
yeah.
trilogy. The third one
Okay,
will be it,
will be
but
the end? Okay,
I always love getting back into her head. It's really fun for me.
interesting. I think that's a good thing. If you find a character that you can really speak through,
Yeah.
that's that's gold.
It,
I
it's
mean,
it's fun. It makes
it's
writing
fun
fun.
to sit down, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, as opposed to if they're bickering in your head, it's totally different.
I know.
It's yeah. I love the characters who surprise me, who, just kind of appear and
And that was
then
Andre
they
for me.
oh, I could see that
Yeah.
actually.
I did
I
not
could
expect him. I had a very different vision for this book when I started writing it. Very different. It was
interesting.
going to be an epic Outlander style love story,
Re
and we know that that didn't really happen.
no.
So yeah, I mean, these characters come out of nowhere, and
It's
honestly,
epic in its own right. It's epic in its own right.
it's a different kind of epic. But I really explore those relationships in book 2 a lot, which is fun.
Oh, interesting. Now, did you find that Andre sort of fed you his lines and his thoughts and his feelings, or did you have
Yeah.
to seek them out?
No, I had to fight him and be like, nope,
Stop talking,
stop
right? Yeah.
talking. And it was actually my editor that was like, is there something happening there? And I was like, no, I don't think. She's like, I think there is. Like, I just really didn't want to see it because
Yeah.
I wanted a different story. So when I went back to edit, I was like, yeah, I got to listen to him. And so I had to
Yes.
really work on him in the end to give him a character arc and give him a little bit more voice. So yeah, I fought
Absolutely.
him, but he pushed his way in.
They do. They absolutely every single time. I had characters when I was writing the Smith family series that um, they would wake me up at 3 a.m.
I love that. I love when
and
they wake us up.
talking and arguing. And,
The best.
for the first 3 or 4 nights, I thought it was like a noisy neighbor or something. And I got up and I'd close the window and I'd be annoyed that, and
No,
it was,
just up here.
it was in
I love
my head.
no one outside of authors would understand that, but we're like, "Oh." But isn't it the
I'm like,
best
I
though?
am very
It wakes you
sane.
up in the middle of the night and it pulls your attention. I think that's just,
Yes.
like, the good stuff, you know?
It is. It really is. I prefer them when they're gentler characters that are tugging at me. So
I kind of
then
like the bad ones though too. They're kind of interesting.
yeah, apparently according to my family, I was not very pleasant to be around while I was writing the second book in the series because she's
Oh,
just
yeah.
nasty.
You take on
So
kind of the feeling.
yeah, a little too much. So yeah, I noticed my dialogue changes like depending on the era.
That's funny.
It's things
Occupational
like
hazard.
It is. Yeah, it is. Better not write anything set in Britain. I might come out with an English accent.
I wouldn't hate that. I wouldn't hate if I all of a sudden had a British accent. I would love it, actually.
I think I'd probably butcher it. That'd be my guess.
Oh, I would
But
too, but in my head, I would be lovely.
it's exactly. Oh, it's like it was like Jen's post today. I don't Jen Craven, if you don't follow her on Instagram, you should go follow because
She's the
today's
best
is
reels. She's the best reels.
so so funny. She did one today of what she thinks she looks like when she's writing, and then
This is
what she really looks like when she's writing. I'm
yeah.
like, that's so true. Like
We
exactly.
look like, we look like troll bridges or bridge trolls. We're like
Yeah, hair is
covered and
everywhere.
it's dark and we're manic and yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's quite it's
Although we try to
entertaining.
make ourselves presentable for these sorts of things.
I know, yes, see makeup and all. So, I have to tell you, okay, we're gonna take a sharp left turn here, guys.
Okay.
Um, I'm super, super, super excited about your next novel that's coming out in June,
Yes.
Chasing Eleanor.
Mhm.
It is literally one of the ones I'm looking forward to the most. I am a huge fan of Eleanor as well,
Mhm.
and the only question I have besides like when can I get it is why is it why has it got the distinction of being young adult? Because even though it's young characters, I
Yeah.
that doesn't stop it from being adult fiction.
I unfortunately right on the line of women's fiction and YA. Always have all my characters are like
Really?
young women. Um,
Okay.
but the other books, I actually have another one that's YA as well. I write it first and then afterwards kind of go, where does this fall?
Yes.
And it's told in first person past tense. I thought that would make it a little bit more
Oh.
adult because she's sort of looking back
Yeah.
at her life.
Yeah.
But really, I was writing this or revising it when we had the WFWA conference in Albuquerque, not this year, but the
Mhm.
year before. And I actually asked Donald Moss this. I was like, how do I know if my book is adult or YA? And he said it happens all the time. And his advice, which was great, is it comes down to two things. It
His
comes down
advice is always
to
great.
I'm like, whatever you say, I'm gonna know. Okay, what's the advice? He was amazing, but it
He
was
lives in my neighborhood.
he does. No,
Yes.
honestly, I left that conference like I can't even write for a week because I'm like, I'm never gonna be that
I
good. I
know.
can't do it.
My mind is blown every time, and he's such a lovely man.
It's no, his teachings are really, if anyone gets a chance to take from him, he's an incredible
Yes.
teacher. So he told me it was voice is the main thing. And you can
Okay.
feel that in how things are presented. We can talk a little bit more about kind of YA, but and then the second is theme. And this is where the voice for me could kind of go either way on Chasing Eleanor. My main character is she turns 18 over the course of the book. Her name is Magnolia, and it's obviously the Great Depression. And so an 17, 18-year-old in 1935 was an adult. Like they were
Yeah.
dealing with adult stuff, right?
Yeah.
So really,
Yeah.
it really walked the line. But in the end, the theme is found family, which is very
Mhm.
YA, and finding strength within yourself to make changes, and that's very young adult.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
and then I
Okay.
think I fought same thing. I tend to fight things a lot. I trust my husband. I resist. Like I'm good with change, but I have ideas in my head about things, and so and I resisted YA big time because my whole world has been an adult. I read my whole
Yeah.
reading, being a reader this whole last 20 years has all been adult. I've not read a lot of YA until the last couple of
No.
years. Now I'm really into it. But once I started reading it, I was like, yeah, I think I do fit better in that world because not better, but for where I'm going and the stories that I'm wanting to tell. Like you mentioned, my Badass Women series, it's all about young women's
Yeah.
history. I
Yeah.
find them fascinating.
Yes.
And when you look at an adult work, it's very nuanced, right? There's a lot of subtlety and it's a lot of restraint and it's a lot of skill involved in that and not just sort of telling
Hmm.
what's happening. YA is still, you still have to
Oh,
do a lot of showing versus telling, but it goes straight to
okay.
the heart. When it was interesting
Oh,
because when a teacher that I worked with, really when I decided, okay, my next one's going to be YA, I'm going all in on this. She kept telling me like, stop talking around it, just go straight to it, like just hammer it in. And that is very YA. It is straight to the heart of the matter, and it lays it out
Hmm,
for you that you just
okay.
kind of get that emotional reaction to it. And it's
So it's like
generally
a blunter version.
kind of, yeah. And it's
Okay.
you get very fast-paced plots. You get
Okay.
it's generally first person, which I like to do
Me
because it's
too.
very
Mhm.
centered in
Mhm.
how they are viewing the world. And
Yes.
so really it's voice and theme and kind of I guess the language and the approach of being a little bit more direct.
Interesting. Okay. But I don't think that being classified as YA will preclude adults from not being interested in the book. Like
No, in
it's
fact, so my recent favorite reads have all been YA historical fiction that's very sophisticated.
there you go.
So,
Okay.
and I love it. I'm like, oh, this is I want more of this. And a lot of it is because they're putting you in the moment, and
Yes.
there's no extra stuff. There's no extra like debating about
Ah,
the world because when you're 18, 19,
the world doesn't matter. It's about
world
what's
is yeah,
happening here.
very
Yes.
myopic. This is what's in front of you. I
Yes.
like that sort of it goes along with my love of action adventure and being sort of I like to be in stories that are a little bit survivalist.
Okay.
And so it works for my personal I still
Hmm.
love I go back and forth between YA and adult, but I like them both. But it is different when you start reading YA a lot more, you're like, okay, this is very direct, the writing style. But it can still be very
So
sophisticated. Like I said, it can be very lyrical and literary.
okay. Because so what's interesting to me about that is it's kind of like it's almost like we've stepped back into history again because
Mhm.
when you talk about history, women in history and how young they were when they had to do these massive things in order to
Right.
sustain life or make accomplishments or achievements or anything like that.
Mhm.
And now we are giving that to our young adults as an audience to read as well. And it's
Yeah.
this cycle of showing them at an earlier age what they're capable of,
Yes.
which
Ah, you
I
just said it
don't
right
think is a
there.
bad thing. It's
That
a
is
really good
why I
thing.
write it because, I was reading adult historical fiction when I was a teenager.
Me
So,
too.
there wasn't a whole lot for 15,
No.
16, 17, 18-year-olds who didn't wanna be sheltered. That's something that I
Yes.
really believe in is we've talked about not watering down history and just really, like, telling you the facts. I remember at
Yeah.
16 being like, "I'm not a child, tell me the truth." And
Yes.
so, you can do it in a way that you're teaching them, but not not going too far. You have a little more
And you're not
leeway in adult to give some of the more details.
absolutely, and you don't wanna be preaching at them either. It's
Exactly.
this
Never
it's
talk down. And you know what's
no.
interesting? I've read some YA books and I'm like, "Oh, please, you are
Yeah.
totally talking down to the reader." And they're not
Yeah.
meaning to. It's just that luckily I must have like an immature mind because as a 45-year-old, I just kind of fall into that 18, 19-year-old voice really easily. I think it was such a pivotal point in
Interesting.
my life that that's why I want to
Mhm.
explore it more. I love the idea of pulling away from who you were growing up and starting to now make decisions for yourself
Yes.
outside of what society tells you you're supposed to do.
I completely agree with that. I have this theory in my head, it's probably only in my head, um, but it is that by about the age of 16, even though you will still make lots of mistakes going
Right.
forward, we still I still make mistakes, lots of mistakes, but you are still by that age, you are responsible for your actions. So
Yeah.
it's knowing what those consequences are of your actions. I
Right.
mean, we give driver's license to
Mhm.
people at
Okay,
16.
let's be real. Can a 16-year-old become a mom? Yeah.
Yeah,
Can
of
a
course.
16-year-old have her world rocked with things that are out
Absolutely.
of her control and she's got to jump into a new world? Like
Yeah,
they have to deal with some pretty heavy stuff, and we don't give them credit for the fact that they
that's
need to
it.
have the emotional skills to be able to deal with these things. And I feel like
Yeah.
books teaching them about other
Mhm.
strong women who have
Yes.
survived wars and persecution and like, do
Yes.
this, girl, like you, and whatever
Yes.
life hands at you, you're gonna be okay. You can do this. I love that message from writing about young
Yeah,
women.
I agree. I agree. I think that's important. We do need to spend more time listening and less time judging.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's
a good
this,
rule for kind of every part of life, probably.
it really is. It really is. But it's one of those things where they're still they're malleable, but
Mhm.
what you help shape them into, they are percolating in their own brain
Yeah.
and come out with something that suits them, which is
Right, and
you
it's
want them to be
also
individual.
it's really fascinating to me that they have nothing to hold them back from being brave. I think that's the thing that really brings me back into their mind because once you become our age, um, 30 and older or whatever, you
I'll go
wait,
with
I think
that.
I'm a little older than you, so,
No, I'm older than you, I think.
you are? No way!
Yeah, yeah,
Wow, girl, you're looking good. So, we have responsibilities, and we
yeah.
cannot make decisions without thinking about our families, without thinking about our kids, without thinking about our husband, our house, we have things we don't have the freedom to be as brave as an 18-year-old who is like, I have my convictions
Mm,
and I have nothing
yeah.
to lose. And I think I remember how we felt about things, how passionate we were in our late teens? At least I was.
No,
Really
I
interesting.
was married by 21.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. So you were already
So
living adult life. Yeah.
mhm,
Um,
yeah. No,
I
I
was
didn't have a
passionate.
child till I was 27, just to be clear.
No, it's okay. No, and that's what I love about, okay, being a feminist is that I love
Right,
that I believe in teaching women to make the choice that's right for them regardless. There
yes,
is no such thing as a right path. There's no such thing as this age, you're supposed to
exactly.
do something, forget all that.
Um,
I have spent my life working towards a career. I have my doctorate degree. I've always
yeah,
been into career. I never really wanted kids. I had kids and I was like, I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. This is the
game
best
changer,
gig I've ever had. It was the best year of my life is taking
right?
time off to stay with my
Yes,
kids. So it was never my plan, but honestly, I wanted the option to decide what was
yes.
right for me at the time. So that's a whole nother, topic.
But
But
choices, right?
choices and young women are pushed way too often into what their family wants, what their society wants, what their
Even what
people
their high school
do.
teachers are telling them to that,
Yeah,
like, just even the whole university thing, you must go to university. No, you don't have to
no,
go to
you don't.
university. You could work in a trade. You could, be a mom, and being a mom is a full-time job. It just doesn't pay very well, but it
Right.
is a full-time job.
More exhausting than a full-time job. Yeah.
Exactly, and you're always on call. But
Yeah.
but there's options for you, and I don't like seeing people's potentials being clipped.
Yes.
It's
Totally.
just it because I when I read your bio, I was like, oh yes, yes, yes. I was exactly the same way, and hid my passion for writing
Yeah.
and entertained myself
Yeah.
and didn't go out because I was afraid of the judgment that
Mhm.
might come with that. People aren't going to like it, and yep, you're right. Some people aren't going to like it.
Right.
But that's not a reflection on me as a person, and so
Right.
you but that takes age and perspective, right?
It does. And I always say that I would not have had the maturity to be a writer until my 40s because I now understand that. And,
Yeah.
I was more, I was actively shot down by my family. Like, they didn't, I was from a lower middle class British family, Scottish family, and arts was not
Right.
prioritized at
That's
all.
not sensible.
It's
Yeah.
not
Mhm,
sensible,
mhm.
100%,
I
and you
understand.
choose the responsible route, and so I will
Yeah.
tell you, I've actually just realized this in the last few years. My husband's like, "What?" My dad passed 20 years ago. I loved my dad. He was my, like, favorite people in my whole life, but I remember sitting at, um, college orientation when I was
Mhm.
18 or whatever, and I had to pick a major, and I sat there with the book, and I read off to him what I wanted to do, and he said no to everything, and I got to physical therapy, and he's like, "Yeah, that's good. That's sensible. Do that." And I checked the box, and now I have my doctorate degree in physical therapy. And I did end up loving it. There were pieces that I really loved about it, but
Mhm.
and I still work in healthcare, so it's, that's still a huge part of my life. But it was not
Mhm.
until I turned 40 that I went, I have got to stop making decisions because other people tell me that it's the right thing for me. I'm going
Yeah.
to take some chances here
Yeah.
and I'm going to pursue this thing that I want to do, no
Yeah.
matter what happens. And I wanted my daughters to see me do that.
That's the key right there, because you lead by that example, right?
Yeah. Even if I
Yeah,
feel spectacularly, like, who cares? I'm having fun, and
yeah,
my kids are seeing me pursue my passion. That's really important.
absolutely. Absolutely, because we're malleable. Women especially are very, very malleable in terms of we'll fit into whatever small box you'd like us to fit into,
Yep.
and we'll do it very quietly and politely until a certain point,
Until we
and
come
then
busting
we
out of that box.
burst out. Exactly,
We've
and we're
all had
like,
that
"No,
moment.
my needs."
Yeah.
And it's finding our voice. And wouldn't it be lovely for young women coming up behind us to have their
Yeah.
voice
Thank you.
earlier?
Exactly. That is
Yeah,
the main reason I write, to be honest with you. That exact reason
right?
right
That makes so much sense to me. Yeah, it resonates. That's amazing. So, Chasing Eleanor is going to be exceptional.
there. I will
I
get you I should have a paperback for you in the next few weeks.
oh, thank goodness. I'm
You
so excited about
I will
this.
say it's we all have these books that, kind of hit a different place in our heart, and
Yes.
Chasing Eleanor is that for me. I struggled through it a lot because it was extremely emotional. I still can't read it without crying. It
Oh,
is
that's a good sign.
it is
That's
so
a good
important to
sign.
me, and I'm so proud of it, and it's so raw, and, Magnolia, my main character, I didn't
I
jump
love
into
that
her head
name.
as easily as Isabel. She made me work for it. She's a fighter. She's feisty.
Yeah.
And so I poured my heart into this story, and I had to work really hard for it. And I love it so much.
I can't wait. I really can't wait because I swear, guys, you're gonna want to go and pre-order Chasing Eleanor. I'll try and put a link below
Oh, thank you.
once
And
we
I will make sure
finish
you
up.
get. I'm just waiting for my author
I
copies to
love
show up, and
arcs.
make sure everyone gets to you.
Arcs are always fun.
So
and
fun.
and you had a cover reveal recently too.
Yes, I did for Chasing Eleanor. Yeah.
Very nice cover as well. I like
Yeah,
that as
same
well.
cover artist who did, the Define the Crown
Ah,
series. She's amazing. Her name's Asha Blue, if anyone needs
there
a
you go.
cover designer. She's
I'm
fantastic to work with,
I'm so drawn in by a cover. I am like,
100%.
you know,
I
I
think we
used to
all are. It's who we are.
yeah, yeah.
We're drawn to certain things for certain reasons.
Exactly. I used to try and choose wine that way. It doesn't work the same way.
It does
But
not, unfortunately.
look at that cute label. Oh, that wine's really not
But it's
very
good to try
good.
out. Good experiment.
But the label's adorable,
Yes.
right? Yeah,
Sometimes it
no.
works out, sometimes not so much.
This is a second glass bottle of wine. Just not so good. So, okay, so we know a little bit more about Chasing Eleanor and what is up next for you after, because you've got a March release and a June release. What are we keeping our eye out for after that?
So then it'll be the next March will be book 3 in the Defying the Crown series.
Okay.
I actually am querying a plot twist. I'm writing YA historical fantasy, which
Oh,
I'm actually loving. It's more like urban fantasy in a historical world. Um,
okay.
and I love it so much because, even like Daughter of the King even has these little touches of magic in it that I
Yes.
love that. I love that. So I'm just really leaning into that. And the one that I'm querying right now is called The Death of Primrose Whitaker, and it's about a
Oh,
1920s
great.
fortune teller. And it is a
Oh,
very subtle
your
Wizard of Oz.
premises are fantastic.
Oh, I love plot. It's definitely like my thing. So that's out with some editors and some agents, and I don't know what's going to happen with it. But and then I'm currently working on not just book 3, but also a book set in 1920s Seattle, and it
Ooh.
is called Vaudeville, and it's about the vaudeville
Ah,
circus.
yes.
I'm really having fun with it.
Yes.
I think for me, history is a little bit magic, anyways. You read
I
these things, and
agree.
you're like, that cannot be real, but you look it up and you're
I
like,
know.
oh, it's real. So there's a little bit of fantasy in it, anyways, for me. So all I'm doing is
Okay.
playing into that feeling of magic that I already get reading historical fiction.
I think that's a very fair assessment because it is does some of it seems completely unbelievable, and
Yeah.
yet, you know, those are usually some of the comments that you get. Well, that couldn't have happened. You're
Right.
like,
Time and chance
actually,
to read
let
these
me
things and
send
go,
you the link to where
no
it says it
way.
did.
Yeah. it's legit. And you're like, what? How does this happen?
Right? That's exactly it. I love it. That's what I love about it because the facts are harder to believe than the fiction.
100%. Like you can't write some of this stuff. Like what?
I know, and that's where your research goes, right? That's all those hours for that
Mhm.
nugget. That
Yep.
is just so cool.
That's
Like,
so true.
there was when I was doing some research on 1920s era in general, I read this fabulous book called um, "The Decade That Roared,"
Oh,
and
nice.
it was so fascinating. But it talked about like things like speakeasies, but like
Mhm.
were fronts of a funeral parlor
Right.
because it was easy to bring coffins in and out loaded with alcohol
Right.
because they were supposed to be heavy.
The things
And
that people did.
and I was like, "Holy crow!"
Well,
Like,
yeah, you have your next book.
I'm like, they're so creative. So
Um, actually, the Death of Primrose Whitaker, um, all of the places that I write about are real. So there was a sanatorium
Mhm.
in Eastern Oregon. We visited it, I toured it, and
Ooh,
back
creepy.
in the 1920s, this is wild, but it's true. It was a sprawling resort on the first and second floors. They had stables, they had ballrooms, I mean, it was extravagant, huge resort. And on the third floor was a medical ward where they did experimental
No.
treatments.
Oh,
And I was like,
seriously?
I have to write a book about this. So
No
yeah, and then there's a whole
kidding.
underground city near there where there's tunnels. And so we went and we walked through the tunnels and I made notes. And yeah, so all of the things that I
Really?
write are based in real places and real people. It's just I really lean into the magic side of things.
That's cool because that is I mean, the feeling of those things give you the sense of the story already, right? Like,
Yeah, and
that's
everything that especially 1920s was kind of fantastical. It was
Yes.
people were really into that Art Deco, like, extravagant
Yeah,
style, and,
yeah.
they did wild things. I mean, things that we
Oh
would
my gosh.
kind of frown on today.
Oh, absolutely. I just read the other day that, Vancouver was, only second to Las Vegas when it came to neon signs.
Hmm,
And I was like, "Huh,
that's
wow,
wild.
okay, I'm not sure we should be proud of that."
That's
But
hilarious, which is
okay.
interesting because Vancouver's a very, like, kinda cosmopolitan town. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Exactly. Until the '70s. The '70s was when the laws came in and said, "No, no, these are gaudy and ugly. They need to be removed." We
Vegas is
still
like,
have
"We'll
a
take
few, right? Like, 'cause they were I have, like some of them I'm looking at the pictures going, "Yeah, yeah, I still see that one. I still see that one." Like,
And some of
it's
the ones from, like, the '50s and '60s were very cool, right? Some of the art
Yes. Oh
mid
my
to modern
gosh.
ones were super cool.
Yeah, like when they had the dinner clubs and the all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Really, really interesting, but alright, so people know that they're getting book 2 and Chasing Eleanor.
Mhm.
Okay, and then book 3 next March. Okay, this is good. We have a few more to look forward to, so I'm
Yeah,
kinda happy about that.
I like that
Um,
too. It keeps your spirits up because, writing is
yes.
so much about being told no and so much about rejections, and, so it's fun to have these things that you move along that you're like, "Okay, I get to look forward to these books coming
Yes.
out."
Well, I also I posted something the other day because I'm like, "This is how long it takes me to write a book, and this is how long somebody takes to read it."
I
Because
know, and people expect it it's like 24 hours. You're like, "Okay, it took you
I'm
some
like,
years, it's
it's
fine."
a great compliment, it really is,
It
but
is a
it a little.
Yeah, you just can't really
So
think about that when you're spending months and months and months trying to
no,
write a
you can't.
story.
No, no, you can't. No. You have to keep that sort of keep those blinders on.
Blinders, that's the key.
Yep. Right? Like, so okay, so this is our last question because I always want to know this, and and I don't have my pen and paper. Usually, I'm ready to write it down.
Got it.
We always like to know what authors are reading. So, what are you reading right now, or what have you read recently that you're telling all your reader friends about?
Um, well, right now I'm reading The Discovery of Witches. Um,
Oh,
and like I said, I love the kind of occult type stuff and I love the magic stuff. So that's been fun. But my favorite reads recently that I am just blown away by are the YA historicals. So the two that really stick out to me are Ruta Sepetys is probably my favorite author.
ah,
She's
okay.
incredible. I mean, her stories are just like I can't put them down. It's one of the
Really?
few authors that doesn't matter what I read of hers, I am sucked in, and I am not putting that book down unless I have to.
Okay.
So I recently read Fountains of Silence from her, which
Uh-huh.
was really great, and I Must Betray You was probably my favorite book of last year.
Oh.
Um, and also Codename Verity. I really loved.
Oh, I haven't read any of those, but I see them everywhere, so
Yeah,
it's on my
and
list.
yeah, and so Codename Verity is it's kind of quippy and I wouldn't say funny, but there's very like kind of outlandish type stuff in there for a World War II like spy.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
dark material, but she adds
Yep,
a little levity to it in her writing that really is an interesting. You just don't
I
see it.
like that. Yeah, I like that. There's A.J. Pierce writes like that, where it's Dear Mrs. Bird. It takes place in
Mhm.
World War II, but she's just so funny
Yeah,
that
and it's really an interesting way to look at that because it's such heavy, awful,
yeah,
subject matter. If you can pull that off, that's a skill.
it's a huge skill. Absolutely, because but it also shows you how people just did keep on going.
Yes.
They just, they found whatever they needed to. I think that's the biggest lessons in World War II stories is
Yeah.
that the human desire to keep going.
Yeah, and in Codename Verity, it's really a story of, friendship. These 2 girls,
Ah,
and
okay.
and it goes back and forth between the 2 of them, and one of them is, from Scotland, so of course I'm like, "Oh, I love it
Right.
already."
Yeah.
But it's really that's in the end what it's about is, how far would you go for your friend?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
Well,
how friendship changes you
it
and it's
does.
and war is not gonna change what you have between people,
Yeah, totally. I think I would like that one actually.
I think you would. I think you would.
Oh, I have my you should see my list. Oh.
Okay. What? The never-ending list is fun for me now. It's like,
I'm
"Hey,
taking
come
my
on."
books with me when I die. That's all I can
I know,
say.
we're going on a vacation in a week, and I'm like, "What books am I gonna bring? I actually have time off. I'll be on the plane." I'm like, I've got my little stack ready to go.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very hard to
I know,
get
but
through
that's
them
what's fun,
all.
though, is having that amazing well to choose from of all these great stories,
Yes.
and, like, we never get
Yes.
bored.
No. 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 I'm happy in my imagination.
Way better than the real
I'm my
world,
own best company.
right?
So,
I'm with you.
that's kind of all of us as readers, right? So, well, this has been so much fun, and I
So
am so glad we got to talk about this wonderful novel.
thank you. I
I'll
feel
put
like
a
we should
link
do that
below.
having coffee and chatting.
I know it's good. It's good to connect with people who understand the process, and readers always enjoy seeing what goes into it and little bits and pieces putting it all together, right? That's always because we do write in a vacuum, and then
Yeah,
it goes out into the world, and it's always amazing when it does.
yeah,
It's
and
yeah,
terrifying.
and absolutely
Equal parts.
terrifying. Yes, it's a bit of a personality issue,
Yeah.
but it's all good. It's all good in the end. It's what's interesting. I don't know if you find this, but when a book finally gets released, like my brain's already moved on to like the second book from that, and but
Uh-huh.
yet people are commenting on that new release, and I'm like, all right, I got to pull myself back. And what was that character's name again? And
Oh my gosh, I know. I mean, I wrote Daughter of the King, what was it, 3 years ago or something? Now, luckily, I'm still in her
you're
life,
still in
right,
her world,
in
yeah,
this sequel. But yeah, I mean, there are scenes that if you ask me about, I might be like, which version was that? Because you can't remember.
right?
You do so many revisions. You're like, wait, which
Absolutely.
one? So yeah,
I
it's a little bit of a challenge, but it's so fun to go
totally
back and talk about this other work that you did. And it's because when
yeah.
you're doing it, you're just like so stressed out. And if it's
Yes.
not coming or if it's wrong, you have to rewrite. You're like, it's never gonna happen. So when you finally get
Yep.
to the end part of it, that you get to talk about the finished product, it's so fun.
It's definitely rewarding,
The
and
reward,
it's
yeah,
nice to hear other people's interpretation because I always find there's readers out there that are way more intuitive
yeah,
and pick up on things that I go,
yeah,
"Wow, you're right."
yeah, totally. You're like, oh, I like that. Okay, it's fine.
Wow, yeah, I probably was thinking that and didn't really think that I was thinking that by putting it on
Yep,
the page, but
yeah.
yes,
There's
you're
lots of layers
absolutely
that we
right.
don't realize we're putting in. So true.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Oh, so fun. So this was a joy. Thank you so
It was
much
great.
for
Thank you.
joining us, and thank you, friends. Oh, we've got a comment. So before we go, I better. Oh, Kate says, Thank you, Carrie. Love the book talk. I just bought Daughter
Well,
of the King. Thank
thank
you,
you,
Kate.
Kate.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jen, for joining us as well live. And grab your book, guys, and have a good weekend.
Thank
Happy
you.
reading, everybody. Sorry, now I've just got to get to the other screen to do
No problem.
Bye, guys.